Hey guys, do you have a TPI bike that is too lean and doesn't want to idle properly? I'm Kyle with Dirt Bike Channel. Today we're going to talk about why that is and how you can fix it. Stick around. Contrary to what you might think, the reason why KTM and Husky went to these TPI bikes is not because they wanted them to run better. It's because they had to meet the Euro 4 and Euro 5 standards in Europe for emissions. They were surpassing the number of total production units that they had to be able to be affected by these more stringent standards, something that Beta and Sherco don't have to do yet. And so they had to figure out a way to make this bike cleaner and have less emissions coming out of the exhaust. In order to do that, they had to control the amount of oil and gas, don't forget about air, Kyle, going into the motor. Thus we have TPI. Let's go over to the board and talk about why this is affecting you and why you might need to make some changes to your throttle body in order to make your bike idle properly and run properly. Okay, this is actually what's happening inside of your throttle body, which I've just taken off the bike. These are not difficult to take off the bike. The hardest part is to get the air boot to actually release off this. There's other videos out there. I also want to credit this diagram. Actually, I took this off of Two Stroke Performance's YouTube channel. They have a video called KTM and Husky TPI throttle body adjustment. Go watch that video, it's very good. They explain this in detail. So this is essentially their diagram. There's really just two things that we want to talk about inside of these throttle bodies. There's the air bypass screw, which is up here. This is not an idle screw, this is an air bypass screw. And then on the bottom, on the other side right here, we actually have the idle adjustment screw. The idle adjustment controls this butterfly inside of here that controls the air going through. So from the factory, KTM has basically a bolt Loctited up in here which sets the idle from the factory because they're worried about the emission thing to pass those Euro 4 and Euro 5 standards. So the only way that they give you to adjust this is using the air screw, and that is not correct. The air screw, the air bypass screw, only affects how rich or lean the mixture is down basically right around idle. Because as you can see, air is coming through like this. Okay, if the butterfly is closed or nearly closed, then air can come through this bypass circuit, right? The air bypass circuit to help this bike run properly and have the proper mix. The idle screw down here, basically, I know this is a crude drawing, but the idle screw basically just affects how far the butterfly will be open at idle, right? Because that is how that works. I'll take you over to the bench and show you in just a second. But because that is Loctited, the only way that you have to adjust the idle is by using the air screw, which is not what you want to do. When you turn the air screw in, essentially push this down, you are richening the mix because you're allowing less air to come through the bypass, right? Conversely, when you take that and go anti-clockwise, screw it out, which is how they're telling you to get the idle to raise up, what you're really doing is you're leaning out the mix, which can cause additional problems. So it's not a good way to control the idle, but it's just the way KTM is doing it because of these standards that they have to adhere to. What we really want to do, if we really want to make the bike run properly and control our idle, is actually fit a new idle screw down here. Not every bike needs this. I haven't needed to do it on any of my bikes. This bike didn't actually have to have it. Some bikes do, some bikes don't, but I'm doing it on this bike to show you guys and give you an illustration. So go watch Two Stroke Performance's video on this because he goes into this in detail, but this is essentially what's happening inside of your throttle body. So let's go over to the bench and take a look at how we install this air screw if you need, or this idle screw to control the butterfly if you need it. Okay, so here we are at the bench. Essentially, when you take your throttle body off, this cover is gonna be popped on here like this. You're gonna have to pop this cover off like that, and that will reveal the idle set screw, which KTM has put in there. Now this will be Loctited in your bike because they don't want you, they didn't want that to be moved so that they can pass those emission standards. So we need to get this thing out. Now, some guys have been able to basically just dissolve the Loctite with this stuff, this Bob Smith Industries stuff, by just putting this on there and dissolving the Loctite very slowly, which I think you can do. I ended up needing to put heat on this to get this to come out. The other thing to mention is that your bolt in there is either a T10 Torx or a 2.5 millimeter hex or Allen key bolt. And it's very difficult to determine which one you have. So you need to be very careful about that because it's easy for you to strip out that bolt and that's not what you want to do. Mine ended up being a 2.5 millimeter Allen. And so what I did is I dissolved some of the, I used this, which you don't have to use, but I used this and dissolved some of that Loctite, but it wasn't enough. So then basically I just used my MAP gas torch here and a glove, and I put some heat on this. Now you don't want to melt this, so you have to put the heat right here. So basically I just held this with the glove because I don't have a vise in here, and then I basically just put the heat right there. It took around 1.5 minutes of 2 minutes of heating this area to where I had the Loctite where it would, you know, become liquid enough where I could get that bolt out. But eventually, after 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes of heating that very carefully, because you don't want to melt this plastic piece, then you can turn this bolt out, right? And the whole idea we want to get this bolt out is we want to put a bolt in there that we can actually adjust, because again, like we showed on the board, see, that's what the bolt looks like. As we showed on the board, this is actually going to control our throttle, this is our throttle body that controls the butterfly. See that? So this is how we actually want to control our idle. Now, this bike actually ran totally fine. The air bypass screw I had out like 4 or 5 turns, and this bike didn't have a hanging idle. It was a little lame, but I was totally fine with it. It ran totally great. What we're gonna do now is I've turned this air bypass screw all the way in. I've turned that all the way in clockwise, and we're gonna start there. I'm actually gonna install this air screw. This is the Jeff Slavens air screw right here. He's the only guy that I could see that is actually selling these. So he sells this air screw with this spring on it to keep it tight for 30 bucks, $29.95 or something like that. So it's really expensive. I ended up buying 2 of them, so I was $70 by the time I shipped it, $70 to get those 2 things. But hey, no one else is making it. Jeff has been making these for a couple of years, and I just haven't needed to do it because not every bike needs this. So this is going to allow us then to adjust the actual idle when we get this on the bike, which is pretty slick. Something to note here though is these, and you should probably measure this with a set of calipers. You guys like my RCBS calipers from my days back in my reloading. Anyway, you should take your calipers and measure this distance where the set screw is, where that idle screw is set from the factory. And I think it's going to be somewhere around 4.5 to 4.8 millimeters or something like that when you actually measure this. So take your baseline. I'm going to set mine down to about 4.6 millimeters right there. That's where I want it set. And so I'll just turn this in. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on these threads before I do that. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. I'm going to put, this is just a little bit of super awesome grease that you get with your levers. So I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on there like that. Now I'm going to put this in, thread that in here, and that should make it so it turns really well. I also used a little bit of this uncure stuff to actually clean out my threads down in there and make sure all the Loctite was out. So I'll do this. And again, we're going to come down to where we're about 4.5. So that's too far. I'm going to back that off. There's not a lot of adjustment in here, but see if I'm there, I'm about, 4.64? I think I'm going to be fine right there. So that's where that's my starting point. And then you'll notice that the cover that you pulled off is going to have to be drilled out. So I've got all the tools here that I used. I used just a drill bit. I drilled this thing out, and then I basically just clipped this off so that now when I put this whole thing back together, once I get my throttle is down in here, my throttle cables, this will actually just go and snap over that little bolt that we've put in there, because you will have to carve that out into kind of a U shape in order to get this to fit once you're going back to install it. But now the cool part is we've got an actual idle screw in here that is controlling our butterfly. This is controlling how far that butterfly is open, so we actually do have an idle screw in there. So that'll be pretty slick to be able to tune the bike. And then we'll tune the bike based off of our air bypass screw and our idle adjustment screw down here. Now I've had a couple of buddies that have done this, and they've said some of them have left this air bypass screw all the way closed and the bike ran great, you know, because that was the richest that they could get it. Others had to have it out maybe a half turn or 3/4 of a turn. So every bike is going to be slightly different. And again, your bike might not need this. My bike, this bike didn't have to have this. It ran really well without it, but some bikes are not going to idle without doing this idle screw mod thing here. So anyway, we're going to go stick this back on the bike. As you can see, when you take this thing apart, you need to take your tank off and then swing your subframe up. That's how you're going to get these air boots to come off of this. Now that I've got the air screw or idle screw installed in this thing, I'm able to just put this back in the bike, hook up my throttle cables and everything, and finagle this back in there, and then we'll be able to actually tune the bike correctly with our air bypass screw, using it as a true air bypass screw like is on the fuel injected 4-strokes, and then control my idle here and control the butterfly with the idle screw. So that should be pretty sweet and make this bike awesome. Okay, with the magic of film editing, you've watched me kind of put this thing back together real quickly, and there's going to have to be some tuning involved with this. I'm going to go ahead and put my air screw all the way in to enrichen it as much as I can. So that's what I've done. I've screwed it in all the way counterclockwise. Don't go too hard. And then we're just going to be adjusting the idle down off of the idle screw down here on the bottom, which we've installed. I haven't started the bike yet, so we're going to see how close the idle is. Let's check it out. Okay, that's a little low. So I'm gonna get in here like this. Okay, that was the wrong way. So we'll go the other way just a little bit. Look at that. Cool, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go ride the bike. Well, I can't do it right now, but the next time out, I'm gonna bring a flat blade screwdriver, and I might need to adjust this air screw a little bit because it might be too rich right now. So I might need to adjust that out like a 1/4 turn or a 1/2 turn, but I'm gonna tune that just like a carburetor air screw or a 4-stroke air screw on the EFI to tune this bike out and make it run right. And I've actually got now an idle screw that I can adjust. So this is gonna be pretty cool. So that's how I've done this, and that's how maybe you could think about doing it for yours. Again, not all bikes are gonna need this one. This one actually ran pretty spot on even without this, but now I think it's gonna run even that much better because I can actually truly tune this thing the way it's supposed to be, the way that KTM couldn't do it because of emission restrictions. So anyway, hope you guys learned something in this video. Again, go check the other video out that I'll have a link in the description for where I got some of this additional information. If you want to support Dirt Bike Channel, you can go to Patreon or PayPal. Right on my website, dirtbikechannel.com, I have a support thing where you can support me. And eventually, I give all the bikes away that I review. So this bike will be one of the bikes that I'll give away at some point to you guys. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video, and let's leave a single track. Thanks, guys.